Receiving incoming transmission.
Incoming transmission.
Incoming transmission.
I'm sure you have many questions.
Transmission.
Transmission.
Welcome to Transmission, a weekly show about the most impactful posts from our Meteor.js forums. My name is Paul Dowman, founder at OKGrow, and each month I am joined by Sashko, Stubailo, and other guests from the Meteor development group. Please note the contents of this show are the sole opinions of their authors. This show is sponsored by Meteor Galaxy Hosting, a containerized cloud service specifically designed and engineered for Meteor app deployment. Learn more at meteor.com/galaxy. This show is also sponsored by OKGrow, an official Meteor Prime consulting partner building full-stack web and mobile apps. Learn more at okgrow.com. Welcome to Transmission number 13. I'm Paul Dowman. I'm the founder of OKGrow, where we help clients build great apps with Meteor. And I'm joined by Sashko Stubailo of the Meteor Development Group.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me on to do this again.
Well, thanks for having me on. Yeah, let's keep doing it. Some people were on Twitter. They were like, "When's the next episode coming out?" They were pretty hyped about Ben Strahan. They were like, "Where's the guy who says stoked all the time?" But hopefully, we can still be exciting without him.
Well, I'm stoked to be still doing it, and we're doing it monthly now. So that's the answer. So we're gonna keep doing this every month. And this month there has been a lot of interesting stuff happening. And the first thing that I want to talk about is there's an old thread that got revived from the dead by a recent post, and it's the thread with the title "Meteor is dying." So this is a long-lived thread that goes all the way back to December. But the post that started it again recently mentioned Saturn, which is something that was discussed at Meteor Camp NYC, which I didn't make it there, unfortunately, so I don't really know what happened. But first of all,
I wasn't able to make it there either, and I haven't seen the video, so all I know is just what I've heard from people.
So I mean, it sounds like it was a good conference, but it sounds like people were maybe a little confused about what Saturn is, and so maybe can you explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Saturn, I think, first of all, I think giving it a name gives it a bit of unnecessary weight in the sense that it's not really like a thing. Basically what happened was we were trying to explore, what is it like to create a JavaScript project that uses a very complete Webpack config that has server-side rendering, all this stuff that you kind of need to set up if you're doing kind of a more non-Meteor style JavaScript project. And I think we're going to leave it more as an exploration and more of an internal Kickstarter thing when we need to do stuff like that. Because I think at the end of the day, it turned out that that simple approach, I think, will not be complete enough for people who are expecting a full service Meteor type experience. And at the same time, it's too magical for people who want to set stuff up themselves. So I think the stuff that we got with Saturn is not it turns out that putting a bunch of scripts in a repository doesn't make a Meteor. So yeah, basically because, we're building this Apollo thing, which is, the idea, I think, is to build projects that are exciting to people both inside and outside of the Meteor community, because, it helps us avoid other situations that have come up with stuff like Blaze, for example, where Blaze was not something you could easily adopt outside of Meteor. And therefore, I think it didn't get as much recognition as it could have, right? If it was super easy to install Blaze into any non-Meteor application, I think it would have been a totally different world, because people would have, a lot more people I think would be using it, right? Because to use Blaze today, you have to agree with all the other design decisions that Meteor has made.
Yep.
But I think a lot of people would have been excited to use it instead of Angular or instead of React or instead of other options out there.
Totally agree.
And in light of that, that's why we're building all the stuff that we're building for Apollo as totally, framework agnostic, plain JavaScript code, right? So, it works with Angular, it works with React, it's going to work with Blaze. You can use it in a Meteor server, you can use it in an Express server, you can use it in a Happy server, you can use it in a Koa server. Basically, the idea is like, why build cool technology and then restrict where people can use it, where I think it is valuable to have a coherent platform where all the parts fit together really well. But I think there's just a subset of the JavaScript community that believes that such an approach is even valuable. And so I think we want to make sure that the projects that we're building can be used and contributed to by as many people as possible, because that benefits everyone who's using the project. So yeah, so basically in order to make it so that we don't end up in another situation like Blaze, basically, which is a thing that I think could have been really huge, but because it was more limited to the environment you could use it in, I think didn't get as big as it could have. That's why we're doing this as like a totally separate project, which we're going to work on integrating into Meteor pretty soon. So we can talk about that later on. How did we get here? Saturn. Yeah, anyway, so the whole point of Saturn was, we want to make some example apps for Apollo that don't use Meteor, because, if the first thing you see when you show up to the Apollo website is like, step 1, install Meteor, step 2, install this framework, I think just that by itself would really
how that goes.
Limit adoption for people, because, first of all, you can't even npm install Meteor, which is something that we definitely want to have, but that would be something people will be a lot more comfortable with. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so we were just trying to make the easiest on-ramp for people who are coming from all different parts of JavaScript to try out Apollo stuff, and that's how Saturn came about. But I think we're probably not going to work on that too much more.
Okay. Yeah. So, and for anybody if I'm not sure if we covered exactly what it is, but yeah, basically it's the build tool and other infrastructure around it.
That's basically like, if you really boil it down, it's just like Webpack config, a couple of like NPM scripts, and like a couple of simple libraries that like when you're using React and Apollo, you have to like do a slightly different thing on the server for server-side rendering than like on the client for regular rendering. And so it basically just handled like those 3 things. That was... Right.
So Webpack has been an always popular topic, and somebody mentioned that on the announcement thread for this show as a question that they wanted to hear asked. And so I'm curious if you could touch on that at all, what the plan for Webpack is, because I think maybe some of the people that saw Saturn thought, oh hey, like here's a alternative build tool based on Webpack produced by MDG. What does this mean?
Yeah, well, so it's really interesting. I think Webpack is like a really good example of the tension between people who are looking to have a Meteor that goes towards like the current, most popular tools that are the most exciting, that have the best features, versus people who are interested in a more stable, backwards compatible, like incremental approach to stuff. Because, as you may have noticed, Meteor 1.3 has module support, and it has, NPM package loading on the client, and all the stuff that you would normally use Webpack for outside of the Meteor world. It has all those things, and yet it doesn't use Webpack. And the question is why? And the answer is, as Ben has commented a lot on various threads, is it was basically impossible to integrate Webpack into Meteor in such a way that you could incrementally move towards it, right? You would basically either be using Webpack or you'd be using the old build system, and there'd be no way to like communicate between the two. And it'd be a much worse situation for all those people out there who are like concerned about the code style of Meteor changing over time. It would be basically just like a totally breaking change to like core way that you write JavaScript. So the reason that we're not using Webpack today is because it was really, really important to us that people could, in the same application, write their code using modules and also write it using the automatic loading style of having per package and per application variables. One thing I think is really exciting about it is, I think, if you enjoy the features that Webpack does give you, which it is super fast, right? It's like got a bunch of various loaders that people use for different stuff that like overlap, but like are not totally filled by Meteor build plugins. I think, Meteor 1.3 gives you a great path if you're interested in starting to use Webpack to migrate your code to the same code style that you would need to do that. Like a Meteor 1.3, like you can take any Webpack app out there and you can run the Meteor build tool on it and it will pretty much just work, and vice versa. So like if people are asking for transition paths to stuff, I think Meteor 1.3 is like a monumental achievement in my mind of like backwards compatibility. Like when have you ever had a system where you can use two totally different module loading semantics in the same app side by side? And so that's pretty much why we did that.
Right. And as Meteor moves more, becomes more NPM centric, then maybe it'll just become irrelevant at some point. Maybe you'll just be able to use whatever you prefer.
Yeah, I think basically that's like a pretty good way to look at it, which is like the world, as we like to say, the world was a totally different place 4 years ago when Meteor started out, where you basically couldn't get anything done without writing a ton of did Grunt exist back then? Maybe it did. Gulp definitely didn't. But I think 4 years ago you could use Grunt to compile some stuff.
Yep.
But in order to compile your code, you need to set up a bunch of Grunt scripts that were pretty manual, move files from one folder to another. But I think in today's world where there are some tools that are already pretty great, like Webpack, I feel like it doesn't make sense for us in the long term to have a totally parallel universe thing that re-implements every single feature that Webpack has. At some point, if you want the features that exist in Webpack, it makes sense to just use Webpack. And so I think where we've been focused is giving people a really smooth ramp where they don't feel like the platform choices they made 3 years ago are going to prevent them from incrementally migrating their code to the thing they want to use today. Like, for example, being able to use React and Blaze in the same application, which is something that we've been doing a lot. And like one of the main benefits of React is that you can incrementally adopt it. And we're thinking of a similar strategy for Apollo, which is right now there's like benefits to using DDP and publications and subscriptions, specifically for cases where you need real-time data. But there's also downsides, right? Which is like you can't really move your data off of Mongo. Sometimes it's not exactly clear what's going on. You need tools like Kadira to understand like what's going on with your publications. And so we want to give people a similar workflow where they can say, oh, maybe I want to move some of my data into SQL or something and start loading that part of their data with Apollo and have it interact seamlessly inside your app.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I'm personally I'm really enthusiastic about this, the shift towards things being a little bit more interoperable, or a lot more, and being able to kind of become more part of the rest of the JavaScript world, whether that means taking our existing Meteor app and eventually running it using Webpack, which you can do now, or likewise pulling in other things from the rest of the world, using them with Meteor, things like React.
Yeah, I think it would be really cool. Like, there's so many different parts in Meteor that are so like ahead of their time even today. Like the Cordova functionality, like the hot code push with Cordova, like bundling your app into native. Like if it were possible to get just that part of Meteor separately, I think a lot of people would use it. And it's kind of a shame that, like I said before, you have to agree with a lot of other things before you can use that one piece that would be really exciting to people.
That now, actually, the fact that you just mentioned that, yeah, like that's something that I would be really, really happy to feel. That's something that I maybe worry about too, though, is like a lot of the comments in the thread were about Meteor becoming less simple and productive. And I think some of that simplicity and productivity is things like the Cordova integration, the way it is. So it's just so amazing to be able to, I mean, of course, there's a lot of work you have to do to customize it, but you get 90% of it just by typing Meteor run iOS, right? Or sorry, Meteor add platform. And
right. Well, and then there's the Electron thing that the people at Mixmax put together, which is also super cool. Yeah, I mean, I think what it is like, people are talking about productivity. To me, productivity definitely means a lot more than just like how many lines of code do I have to write to like get this thing to function. You can talk about productivity at different stages of the application development cycle. You can talk about like there's trade-offs between having a certain amount of magic versus having a stack that you understand more, right? Like, or like is more extensible. So I think the biggest thing I'm missing in the wider JavaScript world personally is like great documentation and explanations of how to do stuff. Like if I were to pick the place where Meteor, where I think Meteor stands out the most among a bunch of other stuff is just like a more clear set of like default strategies to do stuff, right? Like there's if you're like, I want to add login to my app, like here's how you do that. I want to add mobile to my app. Here's how you do that. And at the end of the day, like if you go to the Meteor guide and you go to like the section for how to add login, and instead of like 1 line of code, it's like 4 lines of code. I don't think it's a huge deal in the sense that like, it's just as easy. You just copy 4 lines of code instead of 1. On the other hand, like if that can move you to a place where you understand more what's going on, it's easier for a lot of people to maintain. It's more towards like the standards in the community. I think basically what happens is, you still have a nice path to follow when you're building your app, but you also understand more what's going on. I guess to me, I just feel like people are overemphasizing like lines of code versus like the architecture and like the workflow of designing your app.
Yeah, I know what you mean by that. I think though, another thing to consider is also just the number of options that you have. And I think that's something that has made Meteor super productive in the past because you had a more limited set of options and a package that somebody could write a package that just knew that you were using Mongo, knew you were using Blaze, and you could just get a much bigger set of functionality all at once. And I don't think something like some of the admin packages that have existed in the past, I don't think something like that is going to be possible in the future. So, I mean, I guess it's a trade-off that you have to make between being a more modular and open framework versus having these instantly drop in large blocks of functionality.
Yeah, well, so it's pretty interesting, I think. So I think one place where the ship has kind of sailed on that is with UI frameworks. It turns out that people are just so opinionated about which UI frameworks they like to use. Like if you have an Angular developer, like they're never going to use anything that's not Angular. If you have a React developer, they're not going to use anything that's not React. Yep. And so like that's one place that I think it is going to be kind of like that, where if you're like, I want to get a UI component, you're going to have to find one that's specific to your UI framework, because that's just how it is, I guess. But I think there's a lot of important parts where interoperability is still like pretty possible. And I think that's probably one of the biggest promises that GraphQL brings to the picture, right? Which is, sure, assuming that you use Mongo in a lot of different places is really beneficial to be able to write Mongo-specific tools. But imagine so people have been asking us for a long time to add different data sources to Meteor, like SQL, for example. I think it would be way worse if you now had to write every package for SQL and then also for Mongo on the client and on the server.
Absolutely. Nobody would do that.
Right, exactly. And so that would be just like another probably even bigger split than with anything else, of just like having a totally inconsistent way of getting data depending on where it's coming from. So what we're hoping to achieve with this GraphQL thing is create a different API. It's not the same as the previous Mongo API, because now you're using GraphQL queries instead of Mongo queries, but hopefully something that can let things interoperate through a common data layer, right? So if you want to make an admin package, it might not let you as easily inspect like your Mongo collections, for example. But if you load up your admin package and it can let you inspect your GraphQL schema, it can let you call your GraphQL mutations that are basically the same as Meteor methods. So you can still look at all your data, you can manipulate all your data. And then if you paired that with a package on the server that lets you really easily generate your GraphQL schema from Mongo or from SQL, now suddenly you can have a front-end admin package that works with any backend data source, and separate backend packages that plug the data source into that system. So actually, I think it's going to be pretty great in that way. And I think this is kind of the theme, is that we're really focusing hard on this data aspect of stuff, because it's the one part where we feel like the tools that are available out there are not good.
So yeah, I mean, I totally, that makes a lot of sense. What about things like authentication though? Like for example, in Meteor, do you have the user accounts, the concept of the logged in user throughout the framework? And I think that's pretty awesome. And so like, do you see that migrating to Apollo? Like what you just described is basically GraphQL powering. I mean, one of the problems right now with making that database agnostic would be that the format of the data that's stored is pretty Mongo specific, right? So like that package, the accounts packages are really tightly coupled to Mongo. So, I mean, what you're describing, or at least where my mind is going with that, is that it's a GraphQL schema underneath, and then you could write multiple adapters to Mongo or other databases that would support that, and you could distribute those packages. Do you see that as being something like that you guys would like to do with Apollo? Like would
absolutely
be within the purview of what Apollo should provide?
Yeah, well, so it's pretty interesting because there's definitely a long road there, and I think one of the things that's great is that the GraphQL community, even outside of Meteor, is getting pretty exciting. People are coming up with a lot of different ways to write GraphQL schemas, compose different GraphQL schemas from different databases or different data sources. And we can like try to work together with all of that to make things better. But I think like there's a really nice way, like if I were to imagine what it would look like, I don't know what the timescale would be like, if it's 6 months or a year or something, where you can import a package that defines a certain set of GraphQL types, which you can think of as kind of like collections almost. But you just find a set of GraphQL types, like the user type, like some mutations to update that, like updating your username, updating your profile or whatever stuff is like that. And then you basically, just like you said, you import a package that's like accounts for SQL, and then it like sets up the right tables for you and then fits into the same exact schema. So again, hopefully a client-side tool that would help you manage your logged in users, get information about your current username, even help you do like Facebook login by sending the right tokens to the right place. Ideally, you would be able to, on the server, plug in any data source that you want into that as long as it follows the same schema. And I think like, that's kind of like a wider thing. Like you can even think of a lot more exciting stuff, which is like, why limit that to accounts? Like what about Elasticsearch? Like what if you could just add an Elasticsearch package that adds like a search query that you can call from your app, and then that pipes itself through directly to Elasticsearch, which is something that like, I suppose you could do, in Meteor today if you set up some really careful publications and subscriptions and stuff. But I think it doesn't quite, like GraphQL gives you the ability to take these totally separate data sources and actually define like nice links between them, ways to query data across all the sources at once, while still having the client basically like not have to care where all the stuff came from.
Cool. Okay, well, I think that's pretty interesting, and it actually kind of segues to the next thing I'd like to talk about, which was there was a thread about Meteor 1.4. Let's talk about that first. There's a 1.4 thread, so I think this is just interesting, and I don't want to miss this for anybody that's listening. That 1.4 is imminently coming out, and the focus of that is going to be Node 4, updating to Node 4 and updating to Mongo 3.2. So I guess before we go any further in the future, I should ask about that and just what the
that's going to be really cool. So Ben has been working on a lot of stuff, doing a lot of bug fixes for the Meteor 1.3 series. So there have been a lot of stuff related to like some Windows things, some small stuff, some improvements. One of the things I'm really excited about is like how much better it is now with pull requests on Meteor. I think it's not, people were really talking about this a lot a couple of months ago, but now I think we've really set up a much better process. Anyway, it's not relevant. But 1.4, in addition to things you talked about, which is Node 4 and Mongo 3.2, is going to have another really critical feature that I think we haven't really talked about too much, which is it unpins the core package versions.
Right.
Of your packages.
Yeah, I think we touched on that in the last show, so that is very cool.
Yeah, so that's like some people were talking about what's going to happen? Like, how can we make Blaze development speed up? How can we like make the community be able to contribute more to different packages in Meteor? And this is a huge part of that, because this is going to, with a couple of infrastructure changes, it's going to let people much more easily contribute and work with smaller parts of Meteor than the whole thing, and then use those cutting edge features separately. So we'll no longer have to ship an entire new Meteor release just for somebody to get a bug fix or a new feature, which I think is going to be a lot more exciting than people give it credit for.
Cool. Okay, that's awesome. How close are we to that release?
I think it's like,
I'm not asking for a release date or anything.
At most. I think basically we could have shipped it a while ago, but we really wanted to get some of the other changes into like Meteor 1.3, because for some people, switching the default Mongo version and switching to a different version of Node could be a blocker in different ways. And so we wanted to make sure that people could get some of the smaller features and fixes without having to upgrade to Meteor 1.4, which is why we delayed it a bit to get some stuff into like 1.3.3 or something like that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so I wanted to talk about what would be next after that, and then there was a GitHub pull request that was open for 1.5, and it was about being npm installable. But 2 hours ago, Benjamin closed it and commented that it's a bit out of date, and that the plans have changed a little bit to focus on Apollo. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, this actually came from you asking me before the show about what's going on with that. Okay. And I messaged Ben. I was like, yo, you have this pull request open. I don't want to be on this show and be like conflicting with your GitHub stuff. Yeah. So basically, we spent a lot of time in Meteor 1.3 and 1.4 overhauling kind of like some really core stuff like module loading, versions of Node, versions of Mongo. And so Meteor 1.5 was going to be originally a continuation of that, making it so that it was easier to use parts of Meteor outside of Meteor. You can npm install it, stuff like that. But I think we felt that that wasn't as exciting for Meteor developers, because it's kind of like, if what you're using is Meteor and you're not really interested in like, using stuff from npm or something else like that, then you're really not getting too much out of it. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on starting to bring Apollo into Meteor.
Yes. Awesome.
Which would be super exciting. So what does that really mean? That means integrating with the stuff that is really core to Meteor. So first of all, Apollo already works totally out of the box with the account system. So there's nothing to do there. So that's kind of nice. In fact, I think our first production user of Apollo, New Spring Church, I think they're using it with the Meteor login system, although I haven't talked to them exactly about that. Anyway, so that already works. But then the other two main things I would say are tracker integration, which means you can load data from your Apollo GraphQL queries in the same places as you can load your mini Mongo queries and subscriptions from DDP. So basically, awesome. You can load, let's say you're using React and you're using this create container thing. Inside that container function, you can fully integrate both your GraphQL data and your DDP and Mongo data.
This is huge. I'm so happy to hear this. And the part of the reason why, maybe there's some people listening that are thinking, okay, well, whatever, I don't want to use Apollo yet. I don't know that I want to, and I just want to use Meteor as it is. But even if that's what you're thinking, I think this is huge, because we've just spent 25 minutes talking about the future of Meteor, and the last thread that we just discussed was people concerned that the message that started that thread actually said something about getting, I'm quoting actually, that it looks like MDG is trying to get Meteor off its plate so it can focus on basically Apollo. And I'm ending my quote there. And that right there is the thing that actually answers that question, I think. So I'm really excited to hear that. And I think
well, so basically, I guess we want to make it clear that, while we're working on this as a separate project, which I think is like good for all kinds of different reasons, like for everyone, like it's also the answer to the question of like how you get additional data sources into Meteor,
Yes.
right? Like the whole point of this Apollo thing is trying to figure out how to get an experience that is as close as possible to Meteor data loading, but A, better, and B, also for every data source that you have out there.
Mm-hmm.
So like as soon as we ship that, you have so many different things. Like first of all, you have the ability to not ever use methods for data loading again. So this is like a thing I think a lot of people do, which is they would call a method and they would get the response from that method and they would use that in their application because there wasn't a simple way to publish their data using a Meteor publication. And so with GraphQL and with Apollo, you no longer need to do that. You can wire that through the official data system with GraphQL and Apollo, which will now be like automatically cached for you. When you load that data, it'll like automatically reload when you need it to, when you load other data that intersects with it. Anyway, the point is like, you now have control over reactivity. Like
Yes.
you no longer need to make sure that all of your data is super like real time and reactive. So that's one thing. Another thing is you can load data from any data source you want, right? So you can basically use data from SQL, use data from Elasticsearch, use data from your REST APIs.
Yep.
Like a totally legit way that is going to feel, I think, as close as possible to what it felt like to subscribe to data in Meteor. And another cool thing is, there's all these benefits in which it's just like straight up better than what you had before with subscriptions, right? Like it has built-in support for joining across different types of data, which you had to use like publish with relations and stuff like that before. It has, what else does it have? It has a lot of stuff anyway. But the other cool thing we want to do for Meteor is wire it up to the live query system. So, one of the standout features of the DDP publication thing in Meteor has been like fully reactive data. The cost of that is you'll basically always have fully reactive data no matter what. So what we want to do with Apollo now is make it so that you can subscribe to data in a way that's very similar to DDP, and then have that incorporated into your GraphQL data as well.
Very cool. I'm really stoked about that.
So yeah, I mean, it's going to be really cool because what can happen is basically, let's say you start out, like the ultimate goal is you start out writing your app and like, let's say like everything's super reactive and like, everything's updating all the time. And then you eventually realize that like, maybe the costs are not worth it to have the reactivity on every single part of your app. And then you can basically start flipping a switch and say like, oh, I want this component to update in real time. I don't want this component to update in real time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, figure it out.
So do you imagine that this is a DDP subscription that tells you when the GraphQL query should be refetched?
Yeah, well, so that's one thing that we're still thinking about. So there's really three ways to do it. One way is to do an actual DDP subscription and then like sideload that data into the Apollo store.
Right.
So for context, Apollo inside it has a thing that's similar to Mini-Mongo, which is basically like a client-side cache that keeps track of the data you've loaded before. So yeah, one way is to just do a DDP subscription, then pipe it directly into there. Another option is to simply on the server do a query and then rerun it when the data changes and send a new GraphQL result to the client. And another option is to like come up with a new format for GraphQL patches that's very similar to DDP but not specific to Mongo type data. So we're still figuring out exactly what we want to do there. One thing I think that would be really cool is if this wasn't limited to live query. So like, right now in DDP, you have these like added, changed, and removed callbacks you can call manually if you have your data that's not coming from Mongo, for example. So I think we want an equivalent for the GraphQL thing that will let you wire up basically any source of events you want to also act in this like kind of real-time way. And this is something that the GraphQL community is also really excited about, where people are pretty happy with what it's like to fetch data, but people are really looking for a good solution for reactive data. And so I think we can kind of kill two birds with one stone by designing a great transport for reactive GraphQL data and also wiring that up to all the stuff we already have in Meteor.
Cool. Very cool.
It's gonna be really, really cool.
So would this be like subscriptions would this be GraphQL sort of via subscription, or would it feel like you're subscribing to something, or would it still feel like you're making a request? Maybe that's hard to answer at this point.
Yeah. So what Facebook is using in production with GraphQL is essentially a semantic where you say, it's not like your query becomes a live query or something. You make a separate thing called a subscription that says like update this particular bit of data. And I think that's probably easier to implement because it's very clear what data should be fetched and what data should be reactively pushed. So that's probably something like what we'll start with. You can think of it as basically like a Meteor publication where instead of having a lot of different publications in your app, you just have one publication, and that publication takes GraphQL queries instead of like arguments.
Okay.
Which is basically similar to what GraphQL already does for REST APIs, right? Instead of calling multiple endpoints, you just send one GraphQL query that calls all of your endpoints that you want at once.
Yeah. Okay, I think I get it. I'm trying to wrap my head around what that last part that you just said, but I think I get it. Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
I think the one really cool thing about this has been, there's all these issues that have piled up over time about like different ways that Meteor handles publications, different ways that data is merged or not merged in different places. Like some things about Meteor also make pagination pretty hard to do because all of the data you publish ends up in the same bucket, for example. And so I think the biggest thing to think about is that like we have all of that experience to draw from to make sure that we basically try not to hit the same things again, right? So this is like the second time around that we're doing this thing, and we have so much information. So we're basically trying to build something that's almost an identical experience, but without all the hard parts that Meteor used to have.
Yep. Looking back over the last 3 years, I think that the concept of the publications, the concept of like publish and subscribe, as opposed to fetching data by request, has been watered down like quite a bit anyway, as people started to put it to the real world test. And it used to be that you had, it used to be pretty much on your either globally in the app or based on your route. Like that's the way you would build a Meteor app 3 years ago. You get a set of subscriptions, and then we kind of realized, well, like it actually works better if you subscribe closer to your template. So now we have template level subscriptions. It's a little bit more like the template fetching its own data just at the moment that it's rendered. Best practices used to be that you actually modify the data on the client, and that changed pretty quickly over time. And so now it's a little bit more like every change, like you're going to call a Meteor method now to make updates to your data. So I feel like the way we use subscriptions, publish and subscribe in Meteor, is a little bit closer to request response model anyway.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because in some sense, the things that we were converging on in the Meteor community about or what I was personally converging on, like using methods instead of using client-side updates, for example, is also exactly the same design that GraphQL has, right? GraphQL has mutations which are basically indistinguishable from Meteor methods in every way. And the other really cool thing is when we were thinking about template subscriptions, we had this question, which is like, how many subscriptions should you have? Like should you have one subscription? Should you have one subscription for every single component? Is it somewhere in between, right? Because there's this trade-off of the fewer subscriptions you have, if you subscribe to data ahead of time, then you already have it by the time you render the thing. Yeah. But then that means maybe you fetch too much data. Maybe you don't actually solve it. And so GraphQL has this really, really elegant way of fixing that by letting you basically aggregate lots of query fragments into one. And so you can finally feel like you're doing a lot of small subscriptions, but have all of that happen in one request because you can use these fragments. Because we were thinking about if you have so many subscriptions, can we somehow aggregate them all into one big subscription and do it all at once? And now with GraphQL, you can't do that.
Yep.
And it's also super easy for like server-side rendering, for example, because like, the hacks you had to do in Meteor to do server-side rendering was basically like instantiate a bunch of like publications and subscriptions like on the server, run all of them. But like now again with GraphQL, it's super easy because you just fetch the query the same way on the server. So server-side rendering becomes super easy as well.
Yeah, very cool. Well, I am super excited about that. I'm really looking forward to 1.5 now and in 1.4. But yeah, I mean, this getting Apollo a little bit more integrated with Meteor officially is going to be really great for the things you mentioned, performance, access of other data sources, and in my opinion, for like making everybody feel good about the migration path. So.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be really cool because in some ways it's going to be actually simpler, right? Like before you had to subscribe and then get the data, like now there's just one step, for example. So I think it's actually like more simple than what we had before.
Yeah. Cool. All right. I'm pretty excited about that. Well, we're getting pretty close to time, but I thought we would maybe touch on one more thread that was pretty popular. And this is the one, proposal, the future of Blaze, Autoform, accounts, and Meteor. So this was a post proposing that work be done to move Blaze development to a community project. And the author of the original post also proposed bringing in Autoform and even Meteor accounts. So that's kind of a lot of stuff. But I guess maybe the first thing I would ask is what stands in the way of the community moving Blaze forward anyway right now?
Yeah, so I think it's the thing we mentioned before, which is that like right now, for anything to happen with Blaze, we have to ship a new release of Meteor, and that's something that just because of like the complications that arose over like 3 years of development, it's something that only we can do here inside the building, essentially at Meteor. And so I think the number one thing blocking Blaze development from moving much faster is that there's this like huge release process around that. So right now, there is a thing, like there is a separate repository with Blaze and with all the code in there, and like there's some community contributors on there. But my understanding is that they're relatively blocked because they can't really do too much to ship their code without like doing jumping through a lot of hoops. So I think like hopefully after Meteor 1.4. We can really easily just have people publish versions of Blaze whenever they feel like it, and have everyone who's interested in using Blaze continue to use it.
Right. So because the versions of the core packages are not tied together anymore,
right?
People can just ship Blaze. But does that mean that you can use Blaze from another NPM or another any other JavaScript, like a non-Meteor project?
Well, I think that will be up to the people working on Blaze, right? Because one of the things you can easily do, in Meteor 1.3 and above is just have Blaze be a shell package that depends on an NPM package very easily. And I think that's probably the approach that I would take if I was working on it, because then I can market it to a wider range of people. But yeah, this post is pretty interesting. I actually hadn't read it before. But I think it's pretty interesting. Like, the Blaze community should consider forking 1.2, because people don't want to use imports and exports. It's really interesting because oh yeah, that was the first reply. Okay, I really need to maybe.
But someone also followed up and pointed out that with 1.3 you can still use.
Yeah, maybe really what people need is they just need like a Blaze community repository, which is something you're working on already, and then maybe the next thing people need is like a community guide. So you just start a website and say like, here's how to use Meteor 1 point whatever in the style that we all like and enjoy, right? Like delete all the parts about imports, come up with a great code structure that helps you manage your code in whatever way you want, right? It'll be great. Like we started Galaxy before Meteor 1.3, right? We have this huge app now. It has like thousands and thousands of files, and we're running it on 1.3 today. And like some of the code is in modules, some of the code is not in modules, and like it's fine.
Yep. Well, I mean, aside from wishing to keep things in the simple global way without modules, which I don't think is going to stand the test of time in the future, no matter what. Aside from that, I guess just it's up to the people working on Blaze to publish it on npm and decouple it in whatever way. So, and what I'm hearing from you is that after 1.4, then that'll be possible.
Yeah, I think the number one thing will be like once people feel like they can submit a PR to Blaze and have that come out like immediately, I think that just makes contributing so much more rewarding. If you don't feel like you have to jump through a bunch of hoops and like do a bunch of stuff, if people can just come up with new features or changes they want and then get that published the same day and try it out, I think that'll be like super critical.
Right. Cool. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, and we also brought up accounts here, and yeah, I think accounts is not really going anywhere at the moment. Like, my impression is that accounts is pretty good. I guess like maybe people need some changes to it. Maybe the worry is that like accounts will somehow stop working in the future, but it won't. It'll keep working the same way it does now. So I'm not sure that there's I think it would be great. Like, I think one thing we really want is we do want more community involvement in development of packages. So like if there's people out there who want to work on Meteor accounts really actively, like please do so. Like I will happily like give you all the keys to all the stuff if you have really great ideas about where to take it. If that involves moving it to a separate repository where people can again publish it outside of the regular Meteor release cycle, then like we would be happy to do that.
Yep. Cool. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't want to see accounts become part of Blaze somehow. I'm a little bit confused about what this email is proposing. One of the points says make accounts a part of core, and then in brackets, Blaze community should take up the PR issues with core accounts related packages.
Yeah, it seems like this is in some ways using Blaze community as a proxy for like people who enjoy the way that Meteor worked around the 1.0 release.
Right.
One thing that I wanted to say is, if you want to take a look at like what we think a good community strategy is now, like obviously we've learned a lot, and like the way community contributions and stuff were done in Meteor, historically has not always been great, but we're putting in our very, very best to make that different from the start with Apollo. Like if you look at Apollo client, we're trying to make sure that all the pull requests are merged as soon as possible. There's like so many contributors already that are implementing like core features. And I think that's what I'm really excited about to have happen to the rest of Meteor as well, because I think it's really hard to move in one direction. I think once you've had something that's been worked on with a core team of people for a very long time, it's pretty hard to bring a lot of external contributors into that. But we're working on that. But what I'm saying is just like for the new projects we're starting, it's all about making it easier for people to contribute.
Yeah, I think that's pretty apparent actually. Yeah, it's awesome. Kudos to you guys for that.
Yeah, so really excited about that.
It was only about 8 months ago that was like a really hot issue. And I think that's just not an issue right now. So that's awesome.
Yeah. It's great. Like there's a lot of people that have volunteered as well to help us look at GitHub issues and pull requests, and that's happening every week. So if anybody else is excited in helping work on issues and pull requests, like we're totally looking for people to help do that.
Awesome. Well, I think that about wraps it up. Getting pretty close to an hour. So thank you so much for spending an hour with me, Sashko.
And I really look forward to this like Apollo merging back in with Meteor thing, because that's kind of what I've been working on for so long. And I feel like it's finally going to be a lot more relevant to the Meteor community.
I'm really looking forward to that too. Awesome. And in the meantime, looking forward to 1.4 and all the other stuff that's to come. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.
Talk to you soon. Bye.